Hi, and welcome to the Allplane Podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, let me remind you once more that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other interesting aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. Allplane.tv. Today we revisit one of our favorite topics, that's electric aviation. And to do so, we've got Tom Vroemen in the podcast. Tom is the founder of Electric Leap. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's already sold 2 technology companies, and he now advises companies in the electric aviation space and helps them get funded. Tom's interest in electric transportation actually started with boats, although it would soon switch to planes. Having a pilot license, Tom soon found himself exploring and experimenting with the different possibilities that light aircraft offer for electrification. His initial idea was to launch a business that would provide electrically powered air transportation services. But upon researching this idea thoroughly, he realized that there were still many obstacles along the way. And this taught him a valuable lesson, that is to separate the hype from the facts in this very headline-prone world of electrical aviation. So today's episode is what I would call an exercise of realism about where electric aviation is at the moment, what are its most immediate prospects, and which are, in Tom's opinion, the most solid approaches to secure funding and to make steady but sure progress in this field. So, without further ado, join us for a wide-ranging and insightful conversation with Tom about the electric flight landscape. Hi Tom, how are you?
Hi, Mikhail. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm good. It's the first thing we're doing this week, huh?
Yeah, it's always good to start the week very active with something that,
Yes, it's true. Why not record a podcast at 9 a.m. first thing in the month?
Yeah. Yes, and I hope that it will give us all lots of energy to carry on with the week.
Absolutely.
The rest of the week. So yeah, thank you very much for being here on the podcast. I think your insights are going to be very, very interesting because you've been pretty much on top of the, let's say, the electric aviation space. I will ask you now to introduce yourself, but basically you've been following this industry as an expert, as an investor, I think, and as an advisor to a number of ventures in the electric flight startup space, let's say it this way. So yeah, I've got plenty of questions, but first of all, tell us a few words about yourself and your entrepreneurial career. I think we can call you a serial entrepreneur.
Yeah, thank you. Yes. Yeah, I always, in the early days of startups in Europe, it was a bit frowned upon to call yourself serial entrepreneur. But yes, if you sold a couple of companies, I guess you can call it that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Not well, I must say 2 companies, I think they were not aviation related. They were technology companies. Strictly speaking, we're not connected to the field we're going to talk about now. But I guess you've got a passion obviously for sustainability and also for aviation.
Yes, it's true. I accidentally got into entrepreneurship. I actually had a corporate career after my studies. I have a degree in mechanical engineering and in economics. Later, I got an MBA, but I started my career in a corporate, thinking I would have a nice corporate career. But around 2008, I accidentally, with a group of friends, got involved after, with the credit crunch that was going on at that time. We founded one of the first crowd finance companies. And I've been a founder and CEO there until 2015 when I sold it. This was very interesting because it was an industry. This was a fintech before it was even called fintech. We had to fight the banks and the authorities to actually be able to make people invest very small amounts into SMEs. It's very similar to what a lot of aviation OEMs are trying to do now with the regulatory framework at the EASA and the FAA. Trying to make a big change, like a step change in a sector. And in the beginning, this is seen as a huge challenge. And in the end, you will see that it becomes mainstream.
Yeah, I was thinking that it's a field where you need some trailblazers going ahead.
Yeah, it was tough also because back in 2008, the investments were not as and entrepreneurship and startups in itself that were not as big as they are right now. Back in 2008, 2009, if I would say I would start a startup, everybody would say, "What are you doing? You could have a nice corporate career. Why would you go do like a startup? What is that, a hobby project?" It's a completely different time than it is right now, where everyone says, "Oh, you're doing a startup here. Give me a job, take my money." But no, these were very interesting times, and I learned in that because we really had to get laws changed to, for instance, I'll give you an example. The national bank required any investment company to pay them about 20 euros per year, if per customer that would have an investment portfolio. But we were a crowd investment company, so we would have customers that would hold an investment portfolio of 5 euros for 5 years.
Yeah.
So we had to completely change the paradigm. And this is also something that has a lot of parallels with aviation right now, is especially when you look at scale, when you look at airports, when you look at operators, when you look at OEMs. If we want to fly electric, if we want to fly 100% sustainable, really some paradigms are going to have to be changed. And this requires time, money, and teams with extraordinary capabilities. And that makes it a very interesting sector.
So
after...
Yes. No, go ahead. I actually, I think you were going to say what I was answering my my next question, which was, well, you sold these companies and then you moved on to the electric aviation space.
No, so after Crowdabout, now I set up Buzzmaster. It was a event tech company, which I sold in 2020, and parallel to that, I ran an electric speedboat company, which also happened out of accident. I wanted to have an electric speedboat, and we started developing that in 2015. In 2016, we turned it into a company, and in the end, Ripple Yachts was licensed out in 2020. It was extremely pioneering because batteries are very expensive, and in these electric speedboats, we ran similar engines that are used in electric aviation today. For instance, the engine in the Pipistrel, that is the first certified electric airplane.
Yes.
We used it in 2015, 2016 in the electric speedboats. And, boats have a similar issue as planes. They are very, very energy intensive, and the mass of the batteries basically goes against their efficiency. So whether you're going through air or through water, you have huge challenges. We had to use hydrofoils. We had to use special air. So we had to take everything out of a toolbox to make a craft more efficient. And the advantage of boats is that they are not in such a tight certification scheme as airplanes. Plus, if your battery goes dead, you don't crash, you just float around. So it was a very interesting playground. And I actually have a pilot license, and one of my partners in this company also had a pilot license. And for fun, we were always like taking our drivetrains and our batteries, and we would extrapolate them into the planes we would be flying, which would be like single engine pistons or twin engine pistons. And so I kept, since 2016, an Excel file where I put the state of technology of my batteries and my engines, which were off the shelf, which I had touched personally, which we had seen in our workshop, and we had been able to measure their real performance. And I put that in an Excel sheet, and I had some sort of a framework to compare that with the mass of the engine and the fuel mass, and actually make an extrapolation using the energies we could derive from the pilot's operating manual. And somewhere around 2019, I could see in these Excels that obviously it was always possible to make an electric plane, but in order to reach a capacity, like a payload, to take a sufficient number of passengers and to make a sufficient speed and a sufficient range to have a utility value to travelers, I was thinking, okay, I think this is going to be, if we extrapolate a little bit, is going to happen in around 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So around that time, I created Electric Leap Europe, which had the ultimate vision to create the first electric plane operator. Back then, I believed that this would be easiest done by converting an existing plane, and that we'll probably get back to this conversion theory later. And we started, at a team of 4, and we started experimenting with business models and trying to touch all the proof points that were needed to be touched as soon as there would be a viable electric plane.
But were you directly, let's say, intending to build directly the aircraft, or to actually, let's say, get involved in more as a sort of investors or advisors, get involved in other projects that might be taking shape at the time when you launch this?
No, actually, we were not. My intention was to be the first customer of the first commercially viable electric planes by having a viable business model. It's the electric planes that are going to come. Only they're going to have compromises on size, speed, and range, which hurt the customer perceived utility value. So in order to be able to operate them successfully in a commercial way, you need to create a business model that has a cost that is in balance with their capacity, with their speed, and with their range. And so this was the goal of our company, and we researched a lot. We did a lot of market research. We spoke to airports. We even launched an app where you could book an electric flight in the App Store, and we let people book it to see if they had the willingness to pay of what we were thinking it would cost. And after doing that for a year and a half, we actually had to conclude that it was going to be very disappointing for quite a long time, for probably up to a decade. So I put the operator idea into the fridge to maybe see, okay, we learned a lot, that cost me a lot of money and time, but we learned a lot. And, in the future, we're going to use this knowledge. But in the process, I had spoken to a lot of startups who were electric plane OEMs, or trying to become electric plane OEMs, and they wanted to sign letters of intent, and wanted to exchange and to talk about specifications. So I kind of pivoted Electric Leap into advising these companies, because lots of electric aviation companies are based on a plane vision and are based on creating something that's possible, but if you do not adjust that perfectly to something that is useful to the end customer, the paying traveler, it's probably going to be a product that fails. And the paradigms that were used to determine if a plane is viable in the past are not applicable right now. So I spent my time advising OEMs by letting come together the technology side, the market side, and the financial markets side. And this became an extremely interesting subject, because if you make a thorough analysis of what is technically feasible, of what is actually demanded in the market, in a realistically predictable future market, what is realistic in a financial way, and what also passes some reality checks in the sense of scale and capabilities of what a deep tech startup would be able to do. It is one of the biggest challenges ever seen to actually create an electric plane. And so I guided some of these OEMs in getting their funding. I was involved with some big funding rounds, up to 10 million of OEMs in Germany and France. And I combined this experience in trying to make a vision. And
just to clarify one thing, when you mention electric, are we talking about conventional takeoff, or you are also active in the eVTOL space?
I have followed eVTOL very closely, but I'm not a believer for a very simple reason. You have to do some reality checks when you operate a startup. For instance, let me take an example. We take an eVTOL company, and we try to predict what it should look like in the future. And then you've already invested about 500 million to get it certified. By that time, in order to operate at a price that matches the utility value of an eVTOL, you will need to operate in a dense city where there's a lot of traffic problems. Take cities like Paris, London, in Brazil, there are quite some cities. You'd need to operate at any moment a significant number of these craft over the city. And so this poses a number of challenges to these companies. One is you need to be able to create hundreds and hundreds of these craft in a couple of years, a feat that is at this moment not even done by incumbent helicopter or airplane builders. Secondly, you will need to convince air traffic regulators, air traffic control, to allow the skies of any city to be completely filled up with eVTOLs. And they may be electric, but they're not devoid of noise, and they're especially not devoid of accidents. And if you know, I live in Paris. It's not even allowed to operate helicopters over Paris at scale at this point. I use in Amsterdam. Sometimes I took my plane and I would fly it over the city. And basically, air traffic control is completely overloaded when you have a big air hub in the neighborhood, and you have only already 2 or 3 pieces of small air traffic in the sky. And people will say, "Oh, we will go automated, and EASA will become more flexible, and air traffic control will become more flexible." But these are black box assumptions. Also, they'll say, "Okay, we'll be like Tesla. Tesla can produce millions of cars, so we can do that too." But there's a lot of black box assumptions to make that possible.
Yeah.
Secondly, the law of being able to create a craft that flies for a substantial time at substantial speed in order to create utility value is even harder for eVTOLs than it is for conventional takeoff. And if it's already extremely tough to create a conventional takeoff electric plane with sufficient speed and range, look at the enormous challenges that are faced by HART. How are you going to be able to keep that up in eVTOL? And eVTOL basically at this moment thrives on hype, marketing, a dream of making things possible. And, it's going to be very challenging. The second point is, if you're going to operate air taxis in vertical takeoff configuration, and you're claiming that it is sustainable, you're basically missing a number of points. Because if you can operate an electric air taxi, you can also take an electric ground-based taxi, which is orders of magnitude more efficient in the usage of space and energy. So, in the end, there's a couple of proof points that are almost impossible to meet.
In some use cases, you would be competing with public transportation as well, which I guess from an environmental point of view, in many cases, in a urban environment at least, in many cases it's difficult to argue against, right?
Don't get me wrong, eVTOLs will happen, and they will have some suitable range to transport you from one side to the other side of the city, but it will be an extremely luxury product which will be operated at very small scale. And it will be very, very hard to earn back the investment money, which actually makes it an extremely low feasibility niche. But for sure, it will happen. This law of scales and this law of reality checks also applies to conventional takeoff electric planes. For instance, there's a lot of initiatives with small conventional takeoff electric planes. And this is what we wanted to do initially also with Electric Leap, to operate 4-passenger or 4-person planes with like 2 passengers in some sort of air taxi configuration. Now, it is almost impossible if you look at the cost to operate a single unit with a low number of passengers. You will need to really hit a stack of black box assumptions or proof points in order to get this cost down so much that the chance that you're going to succeed in getting this cost down enough to actually be profitable is very, very small. Of course, big airlines will say we are only interested in planes that carry a minimum 50 passengers.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and we made simulators and models for that the ideal breaking point is somewhere between 16 and 19 passengers, where below that you need the sheer amount of planes and pilots you need to operate at sufficient scale and profitability to earn back an investment in this type of the development of this type of planes. It's nearly impossible, or it requires lots of luck and chance in some accidental changes in the market. And above that, it starts becoming profitable. But as you can see with initiatives like hard aviation, it's also a much harder problem to solve.
Yeah, actually, we have seen just a few days ago how hard aerospace has pivoted from the 19-seat all-electric to the 30-seater hybrid type, which it was quite interesting thing to see.
Yeah.
And I guess, well, on the other side of the spectrum, you would have things like Whisk trying to do the automated to get the pilot, the staff cost out of the equation. But of course, that comes with its own set of challenges, technical and regulatory as well, because of course you're going to have you're going to need a framework for these unmanned things to operate.
No, but you know, maybe the point is not that just there is one breaking point. Like, maybe we're going to have automated eVTOLs. Who knows? Who knows? But the chance that we get it on time is very small. On top of that, the chance that an eVTOL will be able to get the 1 in a billion type of failure rate that's required to fly over populated areas is also very small. Then on top of that, the chance that the cost of the whole thing is going to be so low that it's going to be accessible to so many people that it will earn you back the huge investment is also very low. So it's a stack of chances that are in the end extremely unlikely to come true. And this is how, the point is, this is how, from an investor point of view, a project is approached. But from the OEM, from the entrepreneur point of view, it's basically like, okay, I look at technologies and I think if I combine these together, it's going to work. But then there is going to be like a 10-year, 500 million total process. And we are only seeing the very, very beginning of this. Most OEMs have raised something in the order of magnitude of 5 million. And the first 5 million, in my experience, is extremely easy. But the problem with lots of these initiatives is that they're using this 5 million to design a complete plane, whereas the big problems that are going to determine their future still have to be solved. So a successful OEM at this point is spending 95% of its time on getting these high-risk proof points fixed and not on designing a complete airplane, because 99% of designing a complete airplane is simply a trick that has been done before.
Yeah, that reminds me of a very interesting article. Actually, it was a series of articles that there is this expert called Michael Barnard. He wrote a sort of a critical assessment of the potential of eVTOLs, and well, he went on saying that it was a niche capability, but he didn't see it happening at the scale, more like helicopters are today, like something that is useful for specific use cases, but it's not nearly as universal or as widespread. So you're focusing on the electric conventional takeoff and landing then, and you've been advising companies, I guess most of them startups, that are trying to basically put this concept into practice. We've got a couple of those entrepreneurs here in the podcast. Had Joseph Murray from Electron a few days ago. We had also Airflow a few months back. So yeah, I guess like in these cases, it's usually about creating a new market, isn't it? All these connections between secondary airports, bypassing the main hubs. I don't know if that's a shared vision here.
Yeah, from experience, and from the deep techs I advise, but also from experience from my own companies, is that the most successful startups, the most successful scale-ups, they focus on solving a very focused problem. So the problem with electric aviation OEMs is that they have a small plane. The plane is small. It can carry few passengers. it is slow because some of the electric initiatives that are on the market are not much faster than a car and might therefore lack utility value, and they do not go very far. So what lots of OEMs then attempt to do is to try to define a new market. But these are like exactly the things you should not do with a deep tech startup. You should not try to solve all the problems of the industry in a single company, because you'll get dispersed. You'll be failing on a lot of problems because you are never an expert in all the problems. You'll be missing your proof points, and you will be burning like 10 million, and then you will not raise any new money anymore because you missed all your proof points. But OEMs that solve a very focused problem. So for instance, I know an OEM who have focused their problems at creating a wing containing batteries, which has a perfect structural strength and the perfect integration. And they say, first we create this wing, and only if we manage to have the best battery integration in this wing ever, only then we start looking at really the total plane. I think this is a much better approach than what many people do, is like making partnerships with airlines or making visions on where they can operate and simultaneously working on technology. Classically, you have different entities doing that, and it requires. I really believe that this problem is a leadership problem. It requires executives of a electric plane OEM to build teams that are not just building a dream, but are solving real problems. And the problem with the current deep tech scene is that in order to attract talents and in order to get attention and money and to interest investors, you need to build huge visions. And this is really against what needs to be done in order to succeed.
I guess maybe there's a bit of a celebrity effect here with Elon Musk and everything that he represents for these innovative industries.
But a lot of people say, "Oh, but Elon Musk did it, so we will do the same thing." But can you imagine? There's 8 billion people in the world, and you're trying to do something new, and you say, "Okay, I give myself the chance of 1 in 8 billion that I'm just as lucky and brilliant and serendipity as the single guy who has in history been ruled." Come on, this is not realistic. It's stacking of chance calculations. It's it's stacking of assumptions. So you have to be extremely focused and extremely in control of every assumption you make. So I believe that in order to make a successful deep tech, because this law does not only apply to electric aviation companies, it's really a leadership challenge. It doesn't matter how much you know about the technology, because by the time your first go-to-market plane is done, the technology has changed. And it's all about understanding in detail the stacked risks and the stacked assumptions, and trying to challenge yourself continuously on what assumptions you are making, and if the sum of the likeliness of these assumptions is going to be a threat to your company or not. These companies need to raise, depending if they're doing CS23 or CS25, like in the case of Hart, they need to raise somewhere between 200 and 750 million euros in order to achieve this. And it's easy to get your first 5 million. So lots of OEMs, they get confirmed by their first 5 million and they start working immediately on the final product. But they are unaware of the fact that in order to actually make it to 2030 or something, when they will have their first flight, which they probably don't understand because they think that they can do it quicker and they think they can do it cheaper. But by the time you're there, you'll be having so many contextual changes that you will have adapted your craft. And if you create a plane and you have to change it too many times during the process, you are going to lose your credibility to investors. And this is legitimate, because if you create a complete plane with your first 5 million euros, you're wasting investors' money, because you should actually be solving the real problems. We have some very interesting examples on that. If aviation was one of the first companies in the market. I followed them since the beginning. I think this plane was designed in 2018, based around 2018 technology, 2018 batteries. And if you followed them closely, you could see them struggling with constantly changing designs and having to raise fresh funding all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
This is something that happens everywhere in deep tech companies.
Yeah.
It's
Actually, with aviation, I can say like firsthand because I wrote an article about the new generation of small planes coming to the market for CNN. I wrote it for CNN around 2017 or something like that. And I remember
yeah.
I had the chance to speak with the then CEO that he then left the company, and we have just seen the first flight just a few days ago.
Yes. And it was announced, I
2022.
think,
Yeah,
early 2020, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so, so the point is, in order to attract funding, you need to create big visions, dreams, fast pace of proof points. But in the end, there is a point where you're not going to achieve them if you are not continuously watching the rationality of your choices in the contextual risk framework. And this is a leadership challenge. This has nothing to do with technology or market. It's purely a leadership challenge. And what's going to happen with aviation, these companies are probably going to die out of legacy issues. You see the same thing with lots of eVTOL companies. Before they have been able to have a craft more than 5 minutes in the air, they're already at their fifth craft. And they make a nice narrative. They say, oh, but this is for the city and this one is for longer distance, but it's clear that companies are having trouble in getting their proof points. So you're always able to raise 50 million, but then if you stack the missing of proof points, you're never going to raise the other 600 million you're going to need because it's more money. It's going to be more scrutinized. So we are so early in this industry that we are still optimistic and still believing we are doing good. But nobody is anywhere when it comes to certification, and nobody is anywhere when it comes to reaching the speed and the range, because no speed and range is proven. They are only projections. Mm-hmm. So at this point, when you're doing good, it has no guarantee that you're still doing good for the next year. And this is the biggest problem of basically all deep techs. This also counts for space startups. It also counts for nuclear fusion, quantum technology, whatever. Hyperloops, you see a lot of companies die and the same mechanics. And the OEMs that are going to succeed are the ones that are presenting less plain and that are working more on understanding what is going to kill their company between now and 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Very sobering assessment here of the space. So what, in your opinion, what can we expect in the field of electric aviation in the next decade? Because many of these projects, if we are to believe the projections, which as we have been discussing now, maybe it's not entirely realistic in all cases, we should expect to see a huge wave of concepts and prototypes and other, well, not actually prototypes, actually many of those startups are promising the already commercial vehicles at some point between 2025 to 2027. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can see you're very skeptical with this point. So what can we expect in the next 10 years? I mean, what do you see as a realistic scenario for this industry? Where are we heading to, and what are going to be the vectors for innovation here that will have a stronger chance to result in something solid that consolidates over time?
Yeah, and the small disclaimer here, I am a tech entrepreneur. I'm an optimistic person. I'm often called that I'm overly skeptic on this, but this is the burden of knowledge and experience. And I think it's also very good that OEM founders are very optimistic, but be aware that if you say, I'm going to launch my plane in 2025 and it's going to be more sustainable and better than everything else, you're going to have to live up to this claim. And it's statistically, practically impossible to live up to that claim. And, the market is going to kill you for that. And so you're not going to raise any money anymore if you don't live up to your claim. So, but you have to compete. So what's going to happen in the next few years, I think, is there's going to be a consolidation of realism. Probably some first movers will die because they will have burned too much money and they will need to do another iteration, and it's going to be hard to to raise that money. But you see lots of talents moving away from the crazy companies into the smarter companies. What I love, for instance, I spoke to someone who worked at one of the early eVTOL companies, and he really saw the craziness of what was happening inside there. And he took all this experience and this knowledge to work for a way more conventional, way more realistic eCTOL OEM. And you see, there's a collective learning going on. Companies look at each other. Also, investors will learn not to put blind money into any electric aviation startup with a great story, because any startup founder will tell you a great story, and they will be able to see more what companies have created, tangible technologies that will actually reach into something. Companies that are struggling and that are constantly communicating, presenting the interior, presenting the new version, presenting the new thing, they are a bit in a panic move. I think these are most likely to go away, and that the ones that will have the big achievements within a few years, they're the ones that are still relatively below the radar, very focused, working on non-sexy things. For instance, I'm not a big fan of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a lot harder than hydrogen fuel cells are a lot harder than batteries.
Actually, that was my next question: is how this electric, how does it fit in the whole sustainability landscape? That it's broader than that. But I don't want to interrupt you here, so I'll leave you continuing with what you were about to say about this comparison with hydrogen cells.
We should address that maybe a little bit.
Of
what
course,
I wanted to say about fuel cells is that fuel cells have inherent inefficiency, and if you solve that problem, you will make fuel cells much more attractive for aviation. This is the only problem that needs to be solved to make fuel cell planes possible. But if you are a company that is, and you say, okay, we're going to create a plane and we're going to put 95% of our resources into making a plane and 5% in our fuel cell problem, you're not very likely to be the one who is going to solve the fuel cell problem. But these companies get all the attention because they say, look at us. We have a fancy plane and we are solving, we are going to be the travel thing of the future, and everybody is writing about it. But the company that is actually making the most efficient fuel cells are barely covered because, come on, it doesn't speak to fantasy. And they are only funded by niche VCs, which do really, really good analysis and are less sensitive to hypes. I worked with a lot of VCs. Don't forget, they are not super smart. They are very sensitive to narrative and to hype. So it doesn't matter. It's not that when you raise money that it means that you're right.
Yeah, many of them are also under pressure to buy into the hype because of they're expected to be invested in what's trendy at the time. And
yes, but this is very realistic. When you're a VC and you're operating, say, a 50 million fund, you probably have, when you discount management fees, costs, you probably can spend a single man month on the analysis of spending 2.5 million into electric aviation startup.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, I mean, if you're looking at hundreds of projects, how much time and resources you can devote to looking at all the nooks and crannies of every project, particularly when it's highly technical. Yeah.
And many VCs, they look at, I was once on a negotiation table making a deal, and we were talking about the eVTOL company. And they were saying, Tom, what do you think about this eVTOL company? And then I told them the story of that when you really calculate it at scale, it's going to be like a stacking of chances, and it's almost impossible. And the guy looked at me and he said, okay, I totally believe your calculation, but the investors that have invested in this company are really smart. So probably you're missing something.
Yeah. That happens in every field, I think.
This is the way how, with peer validation, how deep tech investing works nowadays. But and this is because there's an abundance of VC money. It's not rocket science to raise 5 million. The rocket science is to raise the next 200 million. Yeah. And if you bluff, if you are trying to get a total dream picture in the first 5 million, it's going to be extremely tough to keep a straight face and to meet your proof points when you raise the next round. And in the electric aviation OEMs, we are still in this very early phase. So the big problems are still there to come, with the big certification challenges are already visible at hard aviation, and the struggle to even get a plane into the air, if you like stack too many innovations on top of each other, visible with aviation.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see what I was saying, the electric part of the industry? Let's say if we understand the disruption / sustainability aviation space, there's a number of parallel paths that are being pursued. We have sustainable aviation fuel, of course, but then also hydrogen and different flavors of hydrogen, and then electric, and then you have the hybrids in between. How do you see this evolving? I mean, do you see purely electric at some point dominating the space in some way, or remaining a niche because of all the known issues with battery performance, or you see this continuing to develop in parallel? That's something, I don't know. I guess many people are making themselves these questions now, thinking about the industry in the next 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let me say it first. I believe that sustainable aviation is the final frontier of sustainability. It's extremely important that work is being done on this, and it's extremely hard to crack the formula. So I published some quick posts on LinkedIn a few months ago, where I compare sustainable aviation fuels, hydrogen, and battery electric. You know, the big advantage of battery electric is that it's extremely efficient. Electric motors are extremely efficient. Batteries are extremely efficient in storing energy. And if you put clean energy in it from solar panels or from wind turbines, you have what they call well-to-wheel, or maybe well-to-prop shaft efficiency that is above 80%. Fuel-burning aircraft have a very low efficiency, which is something we have become accustomed to. You know, a gas turbine has an efficiency in the order of magnitude of less than 40%. But because we can simply take the oil or the gas out of the ground, we are not questioning the efficiency because it's abundant and it's very cheap to pump it up. If you would create this oil or this fuel from clean electricity, in order to make a valid calculation, you would need to make a well-to-shaft analysis. So when you burn something in the gas turbine, you will end up at a very low efficiency, especially considering that it takes like the efficiency of creating hydrogen from clean energy is about 30%, and the efficiency of creating sustainable aviation fuels from clean energy is about 25%. The efficiency of these energy storage methods is very low. And I published, you can look on my LinkedIn, maybe in recent articles, I published a little table where you can see.
And I can put it in the show notes, definitely, if you pass me the link. Yeah,
it's very basic. And what I would like to invite everybody in this world to do is to do these basic calculations, because people say hydrogen is clean and sustainable aviation fuels are clean, and they are right. They are clean when they are created from clean sources. But because the creation of these, or the distribution of the energy using these methods, is extremely inefficient, you'd need an abundance of clean sources. And on top of that, we have to stack that to fly a plane, the sheer amount of energy required to fly planes at the scale and the distance we are doing today is so big that if you multiply these factors of inefficiency plus the sheer amount of energy you need, that just for aviation, you will need about 4 or 5 times the clean energy we have today. And then we don't even talk about 2050 or anything, you know, it's almost impossible. And I think this should be put more often in perspective, and people should make more calculations. A year ago, Air France, they said, we managed to fly a plane on discarded cooking grease. And this was interesting because they flew, I think, a 737 and one leg and 10% of cooking fat. And they said, look at us, we are being very sustainable. But then if you calculate and take all the discarded cooking fat in France, and you would extrapolate it on the number of planes they operate every day, they would not even be able to serve 0.5% of the planes. So it's not a solution. But things like biofuels, clean fuels, hydrogen are presented as a black box green solution. And we need to be much more sober in that. We need to be much more realistic in that. We need to invite people to do their calculations.
Yeah. Well, they obviously, I mean, these fuels have their advantages. The proponents would tell you, yeah, but they are available now, sort of, in a reduced scale, but you start doing things now. We cannot wait like 20 years that battery technology has made possible some breakthrough or something like that. So do you think it's a breakthrough is possible? I mean, in a, let's say, in a realistic time scale, like 1 decade or two?
I think it's actually the other way around. Because people speculate on abundance of clean energy. But we see in recent events, with the gas crisis, that actually the opposite is happening. We're lacking gas, so we're going to switch more to electricity. So the pressure on demand of clean energy, electrical energy, is going to be bigger. And there's some very striking examples for that. For instance, I remember in the north of the Netherlands, there was an example community where they made the heating of houses with green hydrogen. But now, so they thought, okay, we win. We are less depending on gas. This was a topic there. But now with the electricity prices going up drastically, heating by green hydrogen is extremely expensive because you use 3 times as much energy as if you would simply be heating with electricity, because you need to convert it into hydrogen first.
Yes.
And come on, it's teaching people a lesson that if you do not make your full energy cycle calculations in advance, you're going to be ready for surprises.
Yeah.
And I see, for instance, when it comes to electric plane initiatives, you also see people that speak about, okay, we're going to fly. It's going to be less expensive than conventional flying. And then you look at their calculation, and you see extremely low kilowatt hour prices. You see extremely high numbers of battery cycles. You see no pressure on the battery markets. You see very low. So the point is, we need to learn to make our own calculations and our own estimations of risk instead of listening to what optimistic people are saying.
So yeah, we need to do our own calculations. Yeah, that's clear. So if you were to bet on the expansion of electric flight becoming mainstream, what would be your expected, let's say, development timeline? I mean, if you were asked to put some date to the point where it's possible, I don't know up to which point, as I was mentioning earlier, up to which point battery technology would allow for an expansion of capabilities. What this timeline would look like in terms of dates, let's say like 2030, we might see this segment electrified. 2040, we might see these other segments.
Yeah. Well, I'm very much against predicting too far into the future. I'm much more for, as a company, being ready for an uncertain future at a point where we do not know where it's going anymore. But I would say maybe in 2030, we would see the first commercial electric operations, at least that have a range and the speed and the scale that is like really a contribution in the landscape. Of course, there will be some larger certified electric planes first, but if they don't go far and if they don't go fast enough, it doesn't count because it doesn't have the utility value for transportation. Beyond that, like 50-seaters type of development, it's extremely hard to predict. And I think we will, like what we see happening with hard aviation right now, we're going to see a couple of these increased compromises, incremental compromises. We're going to see that more and more and more. And also some approaches in the industry will become so extremely compromised that they will become obsolete. So my only prediction is that we will see compromises. Initial operations will be very niche-y, and this is good. But that also, it is extremely important to think about how can we fly less? How can we really solve the long distance problem? Maybe there could be something done in efficiency of hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuels. You never know. maybe nuclear fusion will become realistic, and there's suddenly the abundance of energy we all need. It's just that my advice is not to count on it.
Yeah.
So it really depends. I see a lot of great initiatives, like in the Netherlands and France, there are electric flight schools.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. You can use airplanes of today. You can use the pipistrelle vellis to do electric aviation lessons. This is great because in the past they were done with Cessna 172s who flew on leaded gasoline. So this is already great. It's things we can do today, and we have to celebrate that.
Yeah, I think there was a McKinsey report that quantified the percentage of the aviation industry as a whole that could be electrified relatively easily. I think it was something like 17%, something like that. That's including training, general aviation, small commuter planes, all sort of like different utility planes that are out there flying.
You have to start at the bottom, and you have to celebrate that. It's just that a pipistrelle vellis has little other use than a flight training because it's extremely slow. You can only make short duration flights, and you can only have 2 people on board. It's perfect for flight training because when you fly slow, there are no rules in getting a pilot's license that you have to go fast. So it's easier to learn. You only make block times of 45 minutes anyway because you're exhausted when you're learning to fly. So the pipistrelle is perfect for this. But it's we shouldn't underestimate how far away a plane like that is from something that goes 500 kilometers at 200 knots, carrying at least more than 9 passengers, because otherwise it would not be able to be operated at scale.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, Tom, thank you so much for all this overview and all these very insightful thoughts. I think it's something that we usually, when we read all these headlines, we don't give enough thought to. How this is realistic, how is this going to fit, how this is going to actually stand the test of time. And that's definitely something that I put myself homework to be maybe a bit more inquisitive when I read all these type of headlines and see what's hype and what's substance. For people that want to learn more about you and about your projects, about Electric Leap, where should they go? What channels should they check?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of my work is not very public, but when it comes to the energy density issues, it's interesting to read the recent articles, the recent posts I made on LinkedIn. They're very accessible. It's like a short post of 20 lines to show a calculation of how hard this problem really is. I guess that's it. But my work is mostly behind doors because there's NDAs and investors and OEMs.
I can imagine. And then there's a website, electricleap.eu, right?
Yes.
That's your corporate web portal, to put it in some way. Very good. So I'm gonna add those to the show notes. And in the meantime, well, just left for me to thank you very much for dedicating.
I guess I'll be seeing you around.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll cross paths on some other occasion. After all, this is a relatively small world of sustainable aviation.
It is, yes.
And wishing you a great week, because just starting. Today is a Monday morning where we're based both in Europe. So thank you so much.
Great. Okay. See you around, Miguel.
See you. Before you go, and if you like this podcast, a quick reminder that it would be absolutely great if you could please give it a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you're using, or recommend it to a friend or whomever might be interested. Thank you very much, and see you soon.